Good evening, you guys. It's your boy Bill Mahari here, representing Mahari Nation Sports Podcast. Much love to the entire LDBC and the basketball community. Don't miss basketball conversations right here on this channel every Friday night, 9 p.m. Central Time, where we discuss basketball-related news, topics, historical content, and debates, and everything else in between in relating to the world of basketball. You understand what I'm saying? I hope you guys are staying safe out there throughout this whole quarantine thing. You know what I mean? Just stay healthy and try to continue to practice social distancing. And also, for all the new people that's coming in, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon for all the latest notifications when I start dropping videos. We are at 653 subscribers and we're still going strong. You know what I mean? Feel free to come in and share the word about the channel. All right. With the pleasantries out the way, let's talk about the one topic that has been on my mind for a past decade. Okay. This was way before the Bulls documentary was created. Okay. And it kind of been one of the things that I've been thinking about. And the question was, could the Bulls win title number 7? Now, on the final episode of the documentary, um, Jerry Reinsdorf pretty much revealed that he was the one that signed off on the breakup of the Bulls. All right. And he pretty much allowed Jerry Krause to say, this is it. This is the 98 is going to be the final year of Phil Jackson and the rest of the team. Now, Michael Jordan pretty much said that if Reinsdorf and Krause never said that this was going to be it, they would have at least been guaranteed to come back for another year and defend their championship during a lockout shortened season. All right. Now, the big question is 10 players were going to be free agents by the end of the 98 season. Now, Reinsdorf pretty much said it would have been hard to keep all 10 of those players because their market value would have been downgraded to a certain extent. I look at that as BS. All right. It's because Reinsdorf was pretty much a cheap owner and didn't want to spend the money to keep the team together. That's pretty much what it was. And Michael pretty much illustrated that what it was. You know what I mean? Just look at, what he did to the White Sox. All right. Now, ever since the Bulls broke up in 98, they went through 6 straight losing seasons before reaching the playoffs in 2005. We only had one brief resurgence during the Derrick Rose era until that was short-lived, because of his Achilles tendon. Because of his torn knee. You know what I mean? It pretty much derailed his career, and he's had numerous injuries since then. Even though he's made a brief resurgence, he's been playing better in recent years. He's still not the same player that won MVP in his 3rd year in the league. You know what I mean? And that was pretty much the killer for the Bulls at that time. But we're going to talk about, the 98-99 Bulls. That would have been interesting to see how they would have played through a lockout shortened season, because the Bulls were going to have to play 50 games of condensed basketball. It wasn't like 50 games where it was basically going to be spread out throughout the course of months. You would have to play games probably 3 straight nights. All right. And the Bulls would have had to do a better job of conserving some energy for their key players, but they would have had to shore up that bench with some young veterans, some young proven veterans that could give them some energy and minutes. Okay. Because the issue for the Bulls is that most of the top players were going to be in their mid-30s. Michael would have been 35. Okay. Scottie Pippen would have been 33. Dennis Rodman would have been 37. Okay. And Ron Harper would have been 35 up until 99. So it would have been tough to try to, ask those guys to play, big minutes every single night. They would have had to shore up that bench with some young, veteran guys to really, conserve the energy of those guys. Now, Michael Jordan would have had maybe a bit of a downgrade in terms of scoring. I think he would have averaged he averaged 28.7 in 98, but he only shot 46% from the field, which was probably one of the lowest shooting percentages of his career at that point. And Pippen at that time was pretty much deteriorated as a player. He was slowly beginning the deterioration process. And Dennis Rodman was pretty much becoming a wild rebel at that time, because there was this huge period during that documentary where the Bulls and the players were pretty much getting tired of his act. And you would have had to really reel Dennis Rodman in to try to get him to perform at the level that he's capable of. But you would have to ask a lot out of him because he was not a younger player anymore. You know what I mean? So I think that Jerry Krause would have had to shore up that bench. That's number one. Number two, um, I think that the Bulls, particularly in that Eastern Conference, I think they would have won maybe 10-1 to start the year. They would not had that slow start, that they had in '98 because Pippen decided to take surgery on his foot later on before the season started and missed 35 games because of the contract situation. So I think that they would have had a better start to the year, and I think they probably would have regressed a bit because you would have had to ask them to play, three straight games for three straight nights. That takes its toll on an older team. You know what I mean? And you know, I think in an Eastern Conference, I think that the Bulls would have had the top seed, but I think they would have won at least 36 games. You still had the Heat to deal with, you know what I mean? You still had the Knicks to deal with, even though the Knicks were beginning on the downside because Patrick Ewing was in his mid 30s and was just coming back from that horrific wrist injury that nearly ended his career. So they were the eighth seed, and in reflection back to that '99 team, you know what I mean? That '99 team was pretty much a team that was basically young, basically were a quick scoring type of a team, but they weren't a team that that could literally stop you defensively. You know what I mean? Actually, I take that back. I take that back. They were a team that just couldn't that if they had a scoring drought, they could go at least 5 to 7 minutes without scoring a bucket. Because when you look at their stats, the Knicks ranked 26 in terms of offensive rating in '99, but they were fourth in defensive rating. So you knew that they were still going to play at their high level defense. It's just that how much can you get them to score offensively? You know what I mean? And you would have had to incorporate Marcus Camby and Spreewell into the mix, and they had trouble adjusting to the Knicks style of play. And it took them almost the entire year to figure it out until they got to their Cinderella one to the finals. Then you would have the Indiana Pacers that were still going to be in the mix that pushed the Bulls to 7 games. You know what I mean? And then as Miller talked about, the key jump ball between Rick Smith and Michael Jordan pretty much derailed the Pacers' chances. All right. And then you had the Philadelphia 76ers, with Allen Iverson and Larry Brown together that made the playoffs and beat the Magic. You know what I mean? But they weren't ready yet. Then you had the Magic, of course, with Penny Hardaway, who managed to play 50 games, but was clearly not the same Penny Hardaway as it was in '95, '96, and '97 because of the knee injuries. And pretty much Penny Hardaway was at his wit's end in Orlando because, the criticism of what he was dealing with in Orlando was just too much for him to bear. And then pretty much got demanded a trade afterwards towards the end of the year. So I think the Bulls would have made it to the East, would have made it to the finals and meet up with the Spurs. That's what I believe. And that would have been proven fact if the Bulls would have played together. Now we're going to talk about the '99 finals between the Bulls and the Spurs. That, to me, I've been debating about this for the longest. If there's a couple of teams that could have given the Bulls a run for their money, the '99 Spurs and the Rockets. Okay. Now, the '99 Spurs and the '99 Bulls, that would have been a very close series. It would have went the full 7 games in my view because the Bulls needed to score, but they needed to find a way to stop the two-headed monster Robinson and Duncan. Okay. Now, the Michael was still going to get his points, but I think he would have shot a lower shooting percentage. I think he would have had probably the lowest, finals scoring average. Maybe would say maybe 23 to 24 points per game in that series. You know what I mean? Because he would have had to work extra hard to get his shots, and plus he would have to mostly take jump shots because you were not going to go toe to toe with against one of those two twin towers of Robinson and Duncan. Now the key components of that series would be how much can you get from Scottie Pippen at this particular point, because Scotty was pretty much was deteriorating as a player when he was traded to the Houston Rockets in '99. He only averaged 14 and a half points per game and played all 50 games that year. But he was slowly deteriorating because he was 34 years old and he was coming back of another back surgery. Okay. And he was not the same explosive player that he once was. So the big question would have been if Pippen was going to be deteriorated and if he wasn't going to be committed to coming back to Chicago again, would Krause pull the trigger and trade for Tracy McGrady? And would Michael be receptive to that and try to incorporate McGrady into the mix? That is one of the great questions that I don't know the answer to. I think Michael would have had a longer time to try to get Tracy to adjust to what they wanted to do, but I think that McGrady would have thrived well in Chicago. Now that's always going to be up for debate, and I encourage you guys to give your 2 cents on that. Now, when I remember the 1999 NBA Finals between the New York Knicks and the San Antonio Spurs at that time, they were pretty much low scoring, type games because the difference between a lot of those games were pretty much between I want to say between 12 to at least 9 points. Because even though Latrell Sprewell was still gonna give you, at least uh 26 points per game in that series, the only person that was pretty much scoring, above 20 points was Allen Houston. But there were times when Allen Houston could go into stretches where he can't make buckets either. The only top third player that was near 10 points was pretty much Marcus Camby. But also, Patrick Ewing missed the entire, playoffs. No, I should say, no, no, no. He played in the first round against Miami and the second round against Atlanta. But then after game two against the Pacers, that Achilles tendon injury he had was partially torn, and was forced to miss the entire postseason and had to sit and watch the Knicks lose to the Spurs. I think Patrick's presence would have made a huge difference. I don't think they would have won, but it would have been a longer series if Patrick would have played. Now, with that being said, in terms of the Bulls, I think the scores would be probably in the mid 70s or lower 80s because both those teams were pretty much sound defensively. Now, the question about the interior would be how much can you get from Luke Longley against David Robinson? And because David Robinson was going to pretty much torture Luke Longley because Robinson could just beat him off the dribble and just overpower him anytime he wants. And that matchup at power forward between Dennis Rodman and Tim Duncan would have been very interesting. Because even though Rodman could out rebound you, you know what I mean? Tim Duncan was pretty much a beast at his younger days and was pretty much a well-built player when he came into the league. That's why he made first team All NBA in his rookie year. All right. And he was pretty much in the MVP conversation along with Karl Malone, too. And so I think Tim Duncan would have had the best of Dennis Rodman in that matchup because even though Rodman was an agitator, Rodman had problems against excellent power forwards that could beat him off the dribble or had excellent footwork. And Tim Duncan would have been a nightmare for Dennis Rodman to deal with. All right. And then when you look at their bench, they would have need a lot of big bodies to try to defend against those Twin Towers. You know what I mean? Because Bill Wennington wasn't going to defend either or because he would have been destroyed by either or. All right. Dickie Simpkins couldn't defend to save his life. So it would have been tough. It would have been seriously tough. I think that series would go the full 7. I would say I would give it to the Bulls in a close 2-point game in game 7. Now, I don't know who would have had home court advantage. I think the Spurs would have because of how dominant they were in the West. By that time, they were pretty much 6-8, but then they won at least 25 of their last 26 games of that year to finish with the best record in the West. Now, it would have been a tough series. It would have been a lot of low scoring, and I think Michael would have had the lowest scoring output of his finals career. You know what I mean? I think Pippen would have probably averaged at least 13 points per game at best, because Pippen at that time wasn't going to give you much because he was pretty much at the minute. It was slowly deteriorating as a player. Dennis Rodman, it wasn't going to look to score. So he would have had to look for scoring sources from Tony Kukoc and maybe some from Ron Harper, but not much. It's a tough one because they're so evenly matched in terms of their defense. But I would give it to Chicago in a tough 7 game series. I think they would win in 7. It would have been very, very close. But by 2000, it would have been over because Shaquille O'Neal was pretty much at his peak in 2000, and Kobe Bryant was pretty much up and coming. There was been no way that the Bulls would have beaten the Lakers in 2000. It would have been way too much for Jordan and Pippen to deal with. You know what I mean? Because Shaq at that time was just unstoppable. He was only one vote away from being a unanimous MVP and pretty much led the NBA in scoring and uh and I think he led the NBA in rebounding, and then also I think he was maybe fourth in block shots. I'm not sure. I don't remember. But I think the Bulls run would have ended with the Lakers because the Lakers were just pretty much young, they were up and coming, and they were pretty much loaded by this particular point in time. I would have given the Bulls their 7th championship in '99, but by 2000, it would have been it because Shaq and Kobe would have just ate that Bulls team alive. And I think Michael pretty much knows that. But that's pretty much one of the biggest debates, that we as basketball finish experts like myself, Too Raw and Ticket would have had a debate long into the night about who would have won and would have been the implication of those matchups. But tell me what you guys think in the comment section. Do you think the Bulls would have won their 7th NBA championship against the Spurs, or do you think the Spurs would have finally got them? So let me know what you guys think in the comment section.